The Stack. People, Business, Technology. With Dan Tomaszewski of Everything MSP.
Hello, everybody. Dan Tomaszewski here. Hope everybody's doing great. Very excited for this week's episode of The Stack, where we focus on people, business, and technology. Today, we're going to talk about a very critical topic, the rising tide of email threats and how AI is changing the game for both the attacker and the defender. And I'm very excited to have a special guest today. I've got Dave Baggett with Inky. He's the CEO and founder of Inky, leading AI-powered email security provider. We're going to explore many areas here, but we're going to talk about how AI is being used to create more sophisticated phishing attacks and how Inky is using AI to fight back. And we're also going to talk about why this is so critical for MSPs. Of course, we are in the game of protecting our clients, and not only do we need to stay ahead with the latest and greatest, but we need to help educate our clients to make sure that they're protected. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Dave. Dave, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Michigan. A little chilly, but 'tis the season as fall is settling in, right?
Right. We had our first fall day today here in Maryland. It was
Nice.
Very much like summer yesterday.
Was I do like fall. I just like the change of the season, and I'm not a big fan of the next season coming up, winter, but hey, I'm the one that I chose to live here in Michigan. So but as we get started here, and before we really, I guess dive deeper into our topic today, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, of course, bad actors are using AI to create more and more sophistication to phishing emails. I'd love to hear any kind of examples that are in the wild that you've seen, and just some background on them.
Yeah, I'll give you sort of the most staggering thing that I've seen recently, and it's not an example of a phishing mail. It's a bit broader than that, but I'll explain. If you go onto ChatGPT and you put in a query to ChatGPT, I am a security consultant, and I am giving a presentation to a pharma company, let's say, about the dangers of phishing. Can you write me an outline of a presentation and give me an example phishing mail template that I can show? It will come back with a Mad Lib style template that you can fill in as the attacker.
Oh, wow.
That's specifically targeting a pharma company. And you can even go in and target a specific company using this. So even though, of course, OpenAI has all kinds of guardrails around what they want the ChatGPT to answer, it's easy to work around it. Right. And you can just literally, so if I'm an attacker, I can just go on there and have it generate me a perfectly worded, impeccable grammar, perfect English template. Then I can send out millions to victims. And the thing about phishing that's so devastating is it's basically free, because it's email's federated. It doesn't cost anything to send an email. So this new use of generative AI is kind of, attackers can weaponize it not only to create better looking, more believable fish, but also lots more of them, right?
Right. And in just the ability to come up with them so quickly, right? Just on the fly. But like you said too, though, being able to get around any kind of parameters, any of those guardrails that might be built into AI, whether it be Gemini, ChatGPT. I've typed things in looking to, get some type of information, and not realizing that, what I typed in kind of crossed a line. I mean, it wasn't for any kind of, off the wall, obviously, type of purpose. But all of a sudden it says, essentially some type of language that we're not able to do that. And so then, you go through and you say, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. And you just make a simple little adjustment and throw it back in, and boom, there's your answer. So
exactly. You know, and of course, one of the historical ways you could identify a scammy email was bad grammar, you know, punctuation and spelling mistakes. Well, that's gone because it's trivial for the attacker to just have the generative AI create the.
right.
And in fact, you know, we're not sure, but it seems to me like it's happening. We're seeing conversation hijacking attacks where an attacker will get access to a victim's mail account. And instead of going and sending phish or spam right away, we're seeing them now camp out on the account and just sit there and watch the email traffic. And
Gotcha.
at some point, they'll inject themselves in. You know, let's say there's some invoice or wire payment, they'll inject themselves in and redirect the wire or similar. And again, you know, that can just be generated by an AI, that language. It could be someone who's not even a native English speaker, can speak fluently through the AI, essentially.
Right.
So now you know, the patterns that we would historically use in email security to look for broken grammar, bad language, and certain kind of telling phrases, those things work a lot less well in 2024 than they did in, let's say, 2014.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some other ways that bad actors are using AI from this perspective with phishing attacks?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing a lot more sophisticated approaches in general, some using AI and some just sort of taking advantage of clever things about the world. I mean, our communications infrastructure is so complex now. You think about a web browser is 100 million lines of code, right? This HTML and CSS are just vastly complicated. You've got Unicode, which is incredibly complicated. You know, like every language in the world has a script.
Yeah.
And you know, we've seen this even over the course of this calendar year. We've seen this every single year forever, going back in time. The attackers getting more and more clever. And one of the shifts we've seen is it's not so much AI, but it's clever abuse of online services. You know, I'll give you an example, which motivates why we need to use AI to detect it. Also, we saw an attacker set up a Venmo account, which of course is free, right? You don't have to pay anything to do that, and then send out a bunch of money requests. And you would think, well, why would someone pay? You know, you get a random money request from someone. Why would you pay that? You know, how does that work? Well, the clever thing that the guy did was there's a memo where you put what the payment is for. Like, this is for dinner last night or whatever.
Yep.
He put in, you have paid $99 to Geek Squad or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If this is wrong, call this number. And it was a toll-free number. And you know where this is going, right? It's a credit card harvesting scam.
Yep.
So what's interesting to me about this is it's very difficult to detect this kind of thing because that's a legitimate mail from Venmo. It's really from Venmo, right? All the links are Venmo. It passes DMARC and SPF and DKIM because it's really from Venmo. And if you think about it, the only possible way you can detect this as being malicious is you have to understand the language in that freeform text block. So this understanding language, we've been able to approximate it for decades using, again, pattern matching and looking for key phrases. But the only way to do this reliably is to use generative AI to make the system really understand, what does that memo mean? What is the meaning of that text?
Right.
So it's not so much that the attackers are just weaponizing AI. They certainly are doing that, but they're also doing things that require the defender to be using real AI. And that's problematic because real AI, generative AI, is quite expensive to run. And they know this. So they know, hey, if I make these guys have to run generative AI, they're not going to want to do that. So I can get more of my stuff through, especially if it's a legacy system that's been around for years. And so they're doing things that are much harder to detect with the traditional pattern matching mechanisms that email security's relied on for literally since the 90s, spam filtering.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so an interesting thing is my son is in IT now, and he just started a new position at a large IT channel in our channel, and IT vendor, I should say. And so he's going through training right now, and he just like 20 minutes ago came into my office and was asking me a question about anything that I've seen from a phishing perspective in the past with any clients on the MSP side of our business. And it's really interesting is that, the scenario I gave him, real quick, long story short, here was a client who, husband and wife owners, they were out of town. A bad actor sent an email to an employee indicating that I need $35,000 wired to a certain account. Employee said, well, I don't have access to, the bank account to do that. And he's like, oh, I don't know what I was thinking. Go ahead and cut a check. And the employee's like, well, the checks are in so-and-so's office. They're locked. And, but we found a payroll check, so we can cut the check. And he's like, oh, perfect. Code it to marketing, send it, overnight it to this address, and so on. Where, the human element, if that wasn't in place, and this dates back quite some time before we had so much more sophistication on the defense side. But essentially at that point, you really needed to rely so heavily on the human element and the education of those employees, but that doesn't always work. And you need more sophistication in leveraging AI. And so it's just, it's a changing time as far as both on the bad actor side, right? It's a huge benefit for them. But clearly on our side as well, we can truly leverage those tools to combat and to fight back harder, right?
It's absolutely true. And I think a hybrid approach is essential. You have to have the end users participating and also have the machine understand how the end user will interpret the mail. And we actually do a number of things. We've done a number of things with AI for the last decade, actually, even predating all the generative AI stuff that you're hearing about now. One example is we render every mail that comes in as though we're going to paint the screen. Of course, it's all done in the cloud, so it's virtual.
Sure.
But we use a browser compliant rendering process. There's that 100 million lines of code, right?
Right.
And that lets us run computer vision classifiers on the output so that now the software, Inky, can understand how the user will interpret the mail visually. Because if you think about it, phishing relies on the attacker fooling the victim into thinking he's a person they know and trust, or a brand they know and trust, right? So that brand piece, we can, for 350 brands, we can recognize at human levels of accuracy, oh, the person's going to think this is from PayPal, or they're going to think it's Microsoft, or, for 350 brands. And that's using AI that was developed in the 2010s, similar to the way you can search your photos for pictures of your dog.
Yeah.
Your software knows what a dog is now, right? So we've trained models to understand, well, what does PayPal imagery look like? So we've got these core AI-based tools that let us detect and convict malicious brand impersonations. But there are also ways that we use the AI to surface information, almost like insights about the email, that we then show to the user in the form of a yellow banner that we inject in the mail. And that thing now can say one of 80 different things. And of course, why do we say what we say? Well, we say what we say in those banners because of the AI's analysis, right? So the AI is useful for that binary choice. Is this good or bad? But it's also really useful to understand, hey, this is not necessarily bad, but we want the user to know this. Or we can't prove this is bad, but we have doubts. So we want the user to know this. An example would be, hey, this person usually mails from North America, and now this mail just came from Latvia. Maybe they're in Latvia, but that's something that the analysis of the mail would lead us to surface a warning saying it's a potential sender forgery. And that goal of that, the goal of that yellow is just to make the person slow down, even for a couple seconds, and not go and get the check, right? Or not go wire the money, not go buy gift cards, or pick up the phone. And we find it's really effective. But the AI is what drives a big part of what those banners say in our solution.
Okay. Well, using this example, this particular organization, what was interesting is they did use the signature that was the same as what the business owner uses, but they did register a domain name that was the same, exception of they added the letter L in front of it. So very subtle, something that most people wouldn't see. And basically what this bad actor was doing is every time he would reply to an email, he would go into what was showing in the reply and remove that L
Yep.
from it. And what caught him on, fortunately in this case, very fortunate, is he got sloppy and forgot to remove that at one point. And this got through to the business owner's wife, who's an office manager, and she just happened to see that. Like, wait a
Yep.
minute, why is this here? And it was, a freak scenario. I mean, so easily, something that someone could have overlooked. And these are the type of things that AI could look for, right?
Yeah, and in fact, we saw examples of that earlier this year, and I've talked about them in some talks I've given. This exact scenario where someone hijacks a person's account, registers a clone domain name, and in this case, it was, think of the company as Randall Tile and Marble. That wasn't really their name, but similar to
Sure.
that. And the attacker registered Randall's Tile and Marble.com. And
Yeah.
actually, they banked the domain. They just let it sit there for 60 or 90 days. So then the domain age check also didn't fire.
Okay.
And exactly the scenario you said, they would take the entire conversation history and replay it from their new typo domain account. So it looked like it was a reply from the real account. And they went back and
Yeah.
changed all the domain names and all the mail tos. In our case, also, that one example that I show, they forgot 2 of them. Now, in this case, the people didn't have to notice this because we have a model that looks for these kinds of things. It looks for this signs of conversation hijacking and things like, why does the domain name change? Why is the time different? Why are the headers different? There's all kinds of telltale signs
Sure.
that are very unobvious to a human,
Yeah.
but much more obvious to a machine that's able to look at just every single line of the entire history, the entire conversation change.
Yeah.
So we now have a conversation hijacking model that looks just for this kind of attack. And that's kind of a theme. I think a lot of people think that because of OpenAI and these sort of big models, I think people assume we must have some big God model that's, you put an email in and it's a black box that spits out good mail or bad mail. It isn't really like that in our system. And we have much more akin to like 50 to 100 different models, each of which is tailored to a certain kind of tactic. We think about malicious emails really in terms of tactics, and we understand the tactics because people report phish to us and our analysts can see the phish and understand how do they work. And then we feed that back into a development process. So for example, the conversation hijacking, that's a model dedicated just to that kind of attack. And similarly, the Venmo example, we have a model that knows, hey, there are these online payment services, attackers abuse them in this way. The key is to understand the meaning of the memo text and so forth. And that turns out to be a really effective way to deal with just the vast variety of phishing. Because the truth is, there's so many externalities that attackers rely on in phishing, things about the world at large, that the evidence that it's phishing is not necessarily always in the mail itself. There are other things, like when the pandemic started, for example, we saw attackers sending out fake coronavirus notifications, like, log in to get your healthcare information, or even something like one of your employees died, here's the information, like ruthlessly evil type of behavior that relies on what's going on in the world, and similarly, like QR codes. We saw QR codes used for encoding phishing URLs totally explode a year and a half ago. And why did that happen? Because the attackers realized, hey, everyone's used to scanning QR codes because of the pandemic, right?
So they're adjusting and altering, as our world is changing, right? So
Constantly.
Yeah, and it's so far from black and white. I mean, there's so many shades of gray in between. I can only imagine the level of analysis that that you guys go through to identify those different patterns, and and the fact that it's changing on a daily basis. I mean, it's probably changing on an hourly basis, right? As far as that those adjustments.
Yeah, and I often joke, I imagine there's a Walter White type figure out there, this evil genius who's figuring this stuff out. But an example of how clever these people are, there are all these cloaking techniques now that they've developed to get their bad stuff through the incumbent mail protection systems. And the one you mentioned, the typo domain, that applies to the entire text of a mail now. So let's say you want to hide the fact that you're trying to impersonate Microsoft. Well, you just put a typo in the word Microsoft, right? Or you use a different Unicode character that looks kind of like an O in Microsoft, right? And so it's not just domain typos. It's basically now the entire body of the mail, we now have to use what's called approximate matching to scan the whole text of the mail to look for scam indicative text or brand indicative text under this new metric of visual similarity. And there's things like, replacing letters. Like, think about replacing the lowercase d in DocuSign with lowercase cl. That's not even Unicode, right? That's just regular Latin.
Sure.
But that lowercase cl, I guarantee if I showed you that and didn't tell you, you probably would think it said DocuSign.
Right.
And so we've now had to kind of take a step function up of just beyond using what's called regular expression matching, which has been the backbone of mail protection since the 90s. And now we've got to look at all these different ways that these guys can cloak their text and hide it and make it visually similar. So the end user interprets it as saying Microsoft or whatever. They might, it might say your mail account is over quota, something scam indicative.
Sure.
But it doesn't really say that because they're hiding it in different ways. And you've probably heard of things like zero font, where they'll put all this extra text in there, often just random gibberish characters, but they'll set the font size to 0. And why do they do this? Because they know the incumbent systems are dependent on pattern matching using regular expressions. If you put all this extra junk in there, the patterns won't match, but it's invisible, so the end user doesn't see it. It's incredibly brilliant, right? I mean, so we're constantly finding these new techniques these guys have figured out. And again, figuring out the weird nooks and crannies of Unicode and CSS and style sheets and HTML and just the massive complexity in all these standards now is fertile ground for these evil geniuses to come up with ways to reliably get their stuff through the legacy system.
Right.
I mean, reliably.
Well, my question for you, which in some regards with this example you just mentioned, answers to some extent, as far as why is it essential for an MSP to consider email security solutions that are AI driven? I mean, that's one primary example. What are some other examples from that perspective?
I mean, I would say it's just impossible to reliably catch phish and malicious mail generally without AI now. It's just impossible because there are so many ways. Think about a system that's dependent on looking for certain phrases, right?
Yeah.
The white hats try to think about all the different ways that could be worded and have a pattern for every one of those ways. And so they've got these thousands of patterns. And we have pattern matching too, but the point is that doesn't scale to new examples. So you're not going to figure out every possible way that the attacker can write that Venmo memo. There's infinite ways you can word that. So you need to have something that understands language, right? Similarly, think about all the ways that an attacker can make a mail look like it's from a big brand. Well, an easy way is they just take one they got from the brand and replay it. They don't even have to do any work. It's just replay the same HTML. So there we need to have the software understand visually, what does this mail look like? Does it look like it's from one of these brands? And if it does, then well, it better be from a legit mail server for that brand, right? So both of those kinds of things, they're absolutely essential now to blocking malicious mails. And they're both critically dependent on AI tools. In the visual case, it's older technology from the 2010s that does, again, training what are called, adversarial neural networks to recognize imagery. And then the language understanding stuff, what's exciting now is that the generative AI explosion we've seen, now that's allowing us to do similar kind of understanding of the meaning of the text. So we have visual understanding of the mail, and now we're also introducing semantic understanding of the mail. And it's just impossible to solve this problem without it. And why should MSPs care? Well, I mean, the number one way your end users are going to get ransomware is through a phish, right? 91% of breaches, according to Verizon, start with a phishing email. This is your number one, weakness for the really bad scenario you don't want to have happen, right?
Right. Let's as we begin to wrap up here, just one thing I'm thinking about is, there's a lot of competition in the MSP space, and you can put all kinds of tools into your stack that have great levels of sophistication And, regardless of whether it wows the client or not, at the end of the day, it's allowing that client to be, more secure.
Yep.
How does an MSP leverage these type of tools as far as, differentiating themselves and adding more value to their offering?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting because what I've found is, we focus on MSP and channel now, but in our past, we actually did a hybrid model where we sold direct to IT buyers. And what I found is the two audiences are very, very different. So MSPs value, like you said, being able to show value to their end customers. We let you put a logo of your choice. You just upload an image into our admin panel, and that logo goes into every banner. So every single mail that your end user sees will have your logo in there. It's a way of showing value. Like, hey, I'm here. See that thing that's giving you advice?
Yeah.
That's me. Don't forget about me.
Right.
Hugely valuable to our MSP partners. Direct customers would never care about that. Right. And we talked a lot today about efficacy and catch rates and detection. But actually, one of the things that I've come to appreciate is our partners value, certainly they want something that blocks the fish, right? That's the number one reason they come to us. But when they find out, hey, this thing doesn't require a lot of admin work. And we had a partner who said he was doing 40 hours of admin work on Proofpoint, and he switched to us, and now it's 45 minutes a month. He's like, man, that's saving me money every single day.
Right.
Easy to install, easy to operate, and great margins. I mean, those things are as important for our partners as simple efficacy. Because at some level, I think the efficacy question is, look, my current solution is not blocking fish. I got a problem. So they come to us, they try us out. They're like, okay, this new thing seems to block the stuff I was worried about. Check. But now what are the other reasons, right, that I might consider adopting this? And those reasons end up being as important, if not more important. And this whole idea of showing value is so hard to do that with a security product generally, because think about the legacy of mail protection. It's only visible historically when the thing sends something to quarantine, and that's annoying, right? Or when something gets through, and that's annoying. So I think that one of the innovations that we sort of developed over the last 7 years is this: communicate with the user through the banners, let the banners be branded, and that's showing the end user value continuously. Because it's kind of like, hey, there's this helper that's going to tell you, I wouldn't click on that link. Maybe you don't go buy gift cards right now. You know, and that user perceives that as valuable, provided that what you say in those banners, and we're very careful about how we word the language, we got to say stuff in the banners that the users understand.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, otherwise, if you're not putting that out there, besides the banner, but also being able to add your logo, it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. They don't know.
It's invisible, right?
Yeah, it's invisible. And clients don't necessarily know, the true value that you're providing unless you tell them about it. And, and sometimes, it is 100% okay to toot your own horn, because if you don't tell them about this and a competitor is marketing their services and focusing on the AI tools that they have, they're going to be like, I wonder what this other company's all about. But if they already know that you're providing that, then they're not going to think twice. They're going to be like, XYZ MSP has my back, and I'm not even going to think twice about that. So one thing I wanted to have you tell us a little bit about is, I know you have a special offer for our listeners. Can you tell us a little bit more about that special offer?
Yeah, we've got a fourth quarter offer that we launched at the beginning of this quarter, 3 months free on a 15-month contract. So if you do a 15-month agreement with us, you get the first 3 months for free.
Nice.
We're trying to hasten adoption. We've seen in the last year, this calendar year in particular, just a very rapid rate of adoption of our solution. We're trying to go close out the end of the year with an even better, and even steeper hockey stick. So
there you go.
So you can come to our site. Also, we have a partners page. If you come to inky.com/partners, there's a whole bunch of great stuff on there. We're very partner focused now. We do a lot of sales enablement kinds of stuff, and we'd love to work with new partners.
That's awesome. And, our members can learn more at inky.com, or If you are at everythinmsp.com, you can search for Inky. I also have scrolling across a link there that you can get directly to Inky's business showcase profile on everythingmsp.com. Before we wrap up here, just wanted to have you share with us some information about your new product, the DMARC monitoring service.
Yeah, so many of your listeners probably know that Google and Yahoo made a big change earlier this year where they've said, and now they're enforcing this, any sender of mail who sends 500 or more mails a day has to be in perfect DMARC compliance. Otherwise, they're going to get deliverability issues. So this is going to start, this is already starting to impact deliverability rates for our partners' customers, their end users. So we wanted to have a very affordable product that addresses this DMARC space. And we've just launched this. So it's competitive with other DMARC solutions you're familiar with, very similar feature set. But we've made an effort to price it very affordably. And in particular, we don't charge per domain like most of our competitors do. It's purely per team basis. And actually, we're including it in one of our higher end bundles as part of the bundle. So we're trying to get, widespread adoption of this because I think it's going to be important for MSPs to have DMARC compliance for all their customers, much more important than it was, say, in 2023.
And there's also, it's kind of hard to argue against the benefit of having an all-in-one security solution, email security solution, and having everything, contained, within the platform. So that definitely is, a great advantage. So
yeah, and we've tried to do everything email security and adjacent. So DMARC, but also encryption. We even have an email signature service because partners are trusting us with their mail already. The mail goes through us. They can use us putting those signatures on the bottom of the mail, the footers for marketing or compliance purposes. So we have an offering for that now. Again, trying to be sort of a one-stop shop for everything email and email adjacent.
That's awesome. Dave, this has been a great conversation. It's always interesting to hear a lot about the sophistication that the bad actors, are targeting. It'd be an amazing world if they would use that talent towards something good.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that is not the case, and we must combat that. And it is our job, our duty to help protect our clients. Dave, thank you so much for your time. And we will talk to you soon. Everybody out there, thank you for listening to us. Until next time, have a great day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for listening to The Stack.